for joining us on Who Made You the Boss, the podcast where we dig into the messy, meaningful work of leadership, entrepreneurship, and personal growth. I'm your host, Lindsey, and today we're tackling a habit many of us struggle with, people-pleasing. My guest, Amy Wilson, knows about this challenge, which she tackles in her recent book release, Happy to Help, Adventures of a People Pleaser. She is now a best-selling author. She's a writer, an actor, and co-host of What Fresh Hell, Laughing in the Face of Motherhood, an excellent podcast for anyone else who is in the parenthood journey. Amy has built a career out of telling the truth about motherhood, perfectionism, and the pressure to meet everyone's expectations. Sound familiar? I feel it too. In this episode, we unpacked how people-pleasing sneaks into our work, our relationships, and our daily lives, and more importantly, how to break free from it. Amy shares personal stories, hard-won wisdom, and a whole lot of humor to help us set boundaries, let go of guilt, and redefine what it really means to show up for others and ourselves. I would love to hear your take on this topic. Join me on Substack for behind-the-scenes insight and a deeper conversation. You can find us over at lindseyepperly.substack.com or click the link in the show notes. Now, let's get started with Amy. Amy, I am so excited to have you on because the topic you are promoting these days is one that is near and dear to my heart.
Oh, good. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. And thank you for writing the book that you put into the world. We really appreciate it.
Thanks.
So it's so interesting because between both your book and your podcast, What Fresh Hell, you really talk often about the idea of people pleasing. And I really want to dive into the ways in which that affects women in particular, but anyone listening, I think, can have those moments where it resonates, where we find that we're fulfilling ourselves from an external validation, right? And that is why we kind of step up to the plate and request this whole need of, oh yeah, let me do it for you. Or you even said it, we went back to your Girl Scout days. That was a big task for a Girl Scout. But I want to talk a little bit about what your turning point was between just doing what society has told you to do and saying, okay, there is such a through line here in my life about people pleasing that I've got to write a book about it. Like, what was that for you?
Well, the book came together because Zibby Owens and I were talking about writing a book of essays about women's lives, because I did write a book that came out in 2010 that was about parenting. And so I wanted this one to be essays about women's lives, not parenting could be a part of it, but it wasn't a parenting book. And we were talking about the ideas of slack, that you have to pick up the slack for other people, that you have to give other people slack, you have to give yourself slack, and you have to pick up the slack. So, okay, when were the times? So I started whiteboarding this out as a sort of idea of what this book might be. When were the times that I needed to give other people slack, myself slack? And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't think of a time for myself when I had to pick up the slack, when I had underdelivered, when I had not tried my hardest. The more I thought about it, the more I realized, oh, but I could fill this imaginary column next to it that's all full of, like, when did you stay too long, try too hard, not give up, see things through, and that was actually not the right thing to have done in those situations. And then I realized, oh, that's what the book's about, right? That the reason I can't fill this column and I can totally overfill this other imaginary column, the imaginary column is the book. It's I'm an over-deliverer. I'm very responsible. I'm very capable, which is a good thing. People like us get stuff done. People like us run everything. On the other hand, when does it start to be too much? And how can you tell sooner? Is that possible at all?
Yeah, that's a really interesting way to frame that. Has there ever been a point where someone else has had to pick up your slack? Because even as you're saying that, I'm going and I'm cataloging my whole career and my whole type A personality. And you're right. Like, when you lean into this people pleasing art, very rarely do you leave any slack for someone else to pick up.
And it's working really well for everybody around you. Yeah. And then you say, hey, I don't think I can do it this way anymore. And then it's put back on you to fix your perfectionist type A people pleasing tendencies instead of the situation. So that's what the book is about. Like, I'm less interested in how to stop being this broken person with lots of personality flaws, and sort of how do I reset the narrative for how a woman is supposed to live her life?
Yes. Gosh, that resonates so much. I actually was interviewing a friend who's in the same season of the podcast as you will be. Allison here is her name. And she was talking about how, you know, if you kind of like look at every single podcast and blog article these days, that the self-help industry has actually pretty much become part of our problem, that they're constantly diagnosing, they're constantly saying there's something wrong, you need fixing, et cetera, et cetera. And so we especially as a perfectionist or as a people pleaser, are just prime for picking that up and saying, yeah, help me, fix me, do this. And I love your approach on this.
Yeah, I love an assignment. I suspect you do too. I take on every assignment. And so yes, here's a new way to fix myself. Got it.
Yeah.
I can't get the change I seek until I question my codependency, and it just kind of keeps you stuck. It keeps you listening to a lot of podcasts and reading a lot of books and not getting the change you seek because you're like, I have to fix this broken thing in myself first, when
Right.
I'm not sure there doesn't have to be anything broken. And there doesn't have to be anything fixed in you. Like, you have to set healthier boundaries. You just have to set boundaries. Maybe they won't be so healthy. Maybe it'll go badly. Maybe you'll make somebody mad at you, right? The idea that you have to make sure you do it right before you do it at all has been such a big part of what's kept me doing things the wrong way.
Okay. Tell me a little bit more about that, because that really leans into, I would think, the idea of perfectionism, which you write about in the book, and I can definitely identify with. So doing it right before doing it at all. Let's talk about that.
Right. Well, I mean, I think that when I was staying in a job that I stayed too long, or staying in a relationship where I stayed too long, this isn't working. And first I try harder, and then I try to fix myself. And then and then like, okay, this still isn't working. But I'd hate to stop doing it. I'd hate to say I can't chair this committee anymore, and I need to think about the perfect way to say that. And I can spend 6 more months avoiding coming up with that email, because the dread of saying I need to change something has become the primary reason I'm doing something. That, I think, is perfectionism, but it's also very conditioned. We don't want to disappoint people. We're told we're kind of not allowed to.
Yeah.
We're told we're supposed to smile because we look prettier that way, no matter what kind of day we're having. And again, like the Girl Scout thing you were saying before, the Scout pledge is in part, on my honor, I will try to help other people at all times. Now, boys and girls take that pledge, but that's kind of a bonkers thing to ask a grade school kid, right? And I guess everybody around me was like, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to help other people at all say this. But I think I did, like, okay, that's what I have to do. I have to always be a helper, no matter what. And it's not such a mystery where it came from.
Right. Well, and the core of that is goodness, right? Like, it is servitude, and it is helping, and it is kindness, and it's putting good into the world. But it's at what point does that end and our needs begin? And those are the places that I think we, especially as women, are not really taught, which is why I like that. One of the things I like in your book is that you're not setting out to say, let's change this forever and for everyone. I have all the solutions here. It's simply like, hi, I too am a people pleaser, and here are some ways that has shown up, and here are some ways I have corrected it. So I like the incremental steps that you introduce.
Yeah. The biggest takeaway from me was getting comfortable with uncertainty and sometimes unfixability. That sometimes problems stay problems. And what I needed to learn to do was to make friends with them and sort of accept their presence in my life, whether it's a chronic illness or addiction or grief, or like, these aren't things you can problem solve away.
Right.
Nor were you supposed to. And I think when people like us can also feel like we need to solve those problems for the people around us, make them not be sad, make them not have deep holes in their hearts. They're not really asking us to do that. They're asking us to walk beside them when they struggle, to show up. They're not asking us to stay until everything is fixed. And I realized that I think I was looking for that I was actually chasing certainty when I was making sure that my friend who lost a job, that it was, my job to keep sending her job leads and check in with her and do this and this, and I'm going to carry that person until she gets a new job. That's a totally hypothetical example, but that person would be like, thanks for the support. Right.
Feels like something we do.
Actually, expecting you to solve my, battle with chronic illness or my job loss. I do think there's an altruism that kind of takes over in me sometimes. Like, I want to make other people happy. And I think you get lost in that. Like, people talk about people pleasing as being this seething resentment. For me, it wasn't so much that. It was my feelings didn't enter the picture at all.
Yeah.
Right. And like, I wish they weren't asking me to do all this stuff. It was sort of like, I'm fine. This is fine. I'm happy to help. am I? Like, I think I am. Like, it was more that. It's
Yeah.
more when you put other people first and the larger world's needs, your own wants and needs don't even really make the whiteboard in a
Right.
way.
Well, there is a certain shininess, right? And kind of veneer that we put on of course we're fine. We're perfect. We're fine. And I think something that I noticed in a couple of your essays, even that you pointed to, and I thought, gosh, that just nailed it for me too, is how like women's magazines when you're growing up, that are teaching you to have a certain body image and what is wrong with you, because something's definitely wrong with you. We just got to get to the bottom of what it is. And how much society places these pressures on us. To the point where you even took it back to like, the Irma Bombeck days and the I Hate to Cookbook. And I want to talk about like generationally, how this looks, how we pass this down, how we stop from passing this down. Talk to me about that.
I wanted to go through the different sort of generations that I'm aware of. I'm in my 50s, so I've been around for a while, and was reading Irma Bombeck columns on the refrigerator when I was a child. So even though that was like the 70s, I mean, I do remember reading those columns. And the magazines my mom would bring home for the supermarket. And back then in the 70s and 80s, early 80s, the message was sort of like, well, you can't do much about it, but you can have a sense of humor. You can have a few laughs. And it's not so different now than all the content on Instagram. Like, boy, aren't husbands dum-dums? They don't know anything. And you make funny content about it, which I think is good. I mean, it points things out. But when that's the end of the discussion, right? It's just how things are. And that's very much how it was in the 70s and 80s. Like, you can change your mindset. If your husband has a roving eye, you can try not to let that bother you. That's your choice, right? You can't get divorced, what these magazines would say. So you have to try to not let it bother you so much, or try to get a sense of humor about it. But no change, right? Change is impossible. We're not going to talk about change. Just get a sense of humor about it. And then by the time I was a teenager in the 80s, the Young Miss 17 magazine, definitely what I realized when I went back is I would take these quizzes on what body type I had. And there was no body type that was like perfect. Like I love myself the way I am, or like who cares what size your pants are. No, not an option. You were either too skinny or you were plump or you were, way overweight. Right. There was no option to choose in which like, I'm good.
Yeah.
You had to pick a side, too skinny or too fat, and then work on that. Right. Yeah. Bottom heavy, top heavy, and then dress differently so nobody could tell. And again, I love an assignment. So I was like, okay, I'm bottom heavy. I'm this. I'm a winter. I'm, like with boys, I'm I don't know, a swan, whatever. I would take all these quizzes. I'm like, yep, that's who I am. Okay, I have to behave this way now. And I don't think it's so unusual. What's unusual about me is how firmly I attached myself to these things and saw myself the ways people were telling me I was.
Yeah. And when you allow someone else to shape that vision of you, then of course it's easy to play into the hand that is asking for help. And you even talked about how sometimes when you would ask for help, it would backfire, right? It would get you a label as like, oh, you should just be funnier. You should be less naggy, or you should be chill about that. Like instead of you asking for help, that's what's coming back on you. And so you're even further allowing other people to craft how you believe and what you believe about yourself.
Right. It's like, stop being such a blank, a nag, a type A person, like all these things. It's like, but you told me to put other people's wants and needs first. I thought that was the assignment. And now you're saying I should never have done that. Like, but you told me to. It's a very confusing place to be. And it's definitely unsatisfying in terms of making things be different. And I definitely realized that when you say things need to change, I can't keep doing things this way, you will often get back first some vision of, well, you just think things are problematic, or it's your fault things are this way. And you need to sort of stick it out through those things and say like, okay, I can't be the only one to write up the weekly reports anymore. Whatever it is, you can let people say that stuff and don't let it be this sort of self-reflexive dead end fix, so to speak.
I mentioned to you that I told my Instagram network before you're coming on that I had someone coming on to talk about people pleasing. And so I opened up the jar of questions and said, what do you want to know about people pleasing? And Amy, I got so many responses from so many people I know and love, most of them being the question of, how do I make it stop? And I want to just go ahead and preface, you are a people-pleasing expert in that you are an expert in people-pleasing, not necessarily in that you have solved people-pleasing, right?
Well, that's right. The world is predicated on us being people pleasing, right? I mean, most women work outside the home these days, and yet our kids' school systems are still predicated on this idea that school gets out at 3 and there's somebody available for free to drive them to soccer practice and this and to do the sign up for the basketball tournament. And there's so much free labor of people presumed, and it's presumed for women, and it's not in your imagination. So I just always want to push back, like that people pleasing behavior is expected of you, and to be told to stop being a people pleaser is not enough. That you instead have to say, these things need to change. I can't do this anymore, and set boundaries. But stop with this, like, why was I such a dummy? Why am I such an idiot? Why am I such a people pleaser? Like, it's not your fault, and it's not useful.
Yeah. The comment that stood out to me the most, that absolutely cracked me up, but it actually completely validates everything that you're saying, is someone from my team said, I am like a walking Chick-fil-A, right? It would be my pleasure. Always. Like, that is the storyline. That is the tagline. I'm a walking Chick-fil-A because, yes, how can I serve you today? And I thought that was hysterical.
It's not always, here's how you know if it's a problem, I think. If the resentment is the number one thing that comes to mind, if you are that walking Chick-fil-A, like, sure, no problem. And inside you're like, I can't believe these people. Okay, that's people pleasing, right? And you need to address this. If there really is this altruism and like, gee, am I a bad person that I volunteer at the soup kitchen 3 nights a week? Because I kind of like it and the people kind of like me. Like, no, there's nothing wrong with you. You make the world a better place. Keep doing it. Don't accept that that's a personality flaw. But when the resentment comes in, or when the fear of, I can't have this difficult conversation because I'm not sure what will happen, that's the clue that that's a conversation you have to have. And that's what I mean about getting comfortable with uncertainty, that I have gotten better at saying, this needs to change, or I don't think I can do this anymore. And then sitting in the uncomfortable silence that follows. People won't say, no problem, I'll do it. I mean, maybe rarely, but it's never happened to me. Instead, there's a silence that follows while everybody else is rebooting. Like, is she saying, do I have to do that? Everybody's doing that, right? And it just takes time. And it's uncomfortable for everybody. But what I've done in the past is said, but I guess maybe I can keep doing it till somebody else takes over. I guess I could do half of it. I could be the vice chair. I take half of it back, or 3/4 of it back, if there's silence that lasts longer than 3 seconds, right?
Right.
But that's the part that you have to change. Say you know that you need things to be different, or you can't do it, and then stop talking and just like bite your tongue, sit on your hands, whatever, let it go. And I'm not saying everything will magically resolve. I don't know what will happen, and neither do you, but it's the fear of not knowing what will happen that's keeping you doing your share and half of everybody else's share as well.
Yeah. You know, what's really interesting is, even as you gave that example, I thought, okay, well, we have to be mindful of the times that our voice rises an octave, right? Because those are the moments where it's almost as though we are actively people pleasing when we become more effeminate, more, how can I help? How can I, like, when you're trying to fill the space with, oh, I didn't mean it, I'll take it back, I'll actually make it better. Like, you're actually bringing to this type of conversation kind of a masculine energy of saying firmly, this is where I end. This is where my responsibilities end. And just being comfortable with, and I don't have necessarily a solution for what's next. This is for us to figure out together, versus it only being you and your responsibility.
And you don't have to be comfortable. I mean, you can be uncomfortable. You don't have to be confident. You don't have to do it right. You don't have to, you just have to express your own need and then let it sit. And I'm not saying that'll resolve. Like, maybe there's something at your work that's unfixable, but instead of being resentful for another 5 years in your position, you have the difficult conversation. And then if you still don't get the help you need or the recognition you require, then maybe you leave. But I'm not saying it's easy. It's definitely not easy, but that's the key. It's live in the uncomfortable, say the hard thing, and don't make sure you have the perfect wording written down first, right? It's okay.
So Speaking of that kind of preparation, though, I'd love to give listeners just some sort of tangible tips. Like if you're preparing for a conversation like that, or if you're saying, okay, this is me, I recognize that I have been bending to the will of too many other people. And now I want to start taking back some of that control. Like, what could they do next to start? Is this sitting down and writing something? Is it like what, or do you have a method? Is there a playlist we should be listening to? Like what is helpful here?
I mean, the easiest thing is not to say yes to the next thing in the first place, right? It's a lot easier not to say yes. And it's hard not to say yes, but it's going to be even harder to get yourself out later. So get more wary of saying yes. You know, Brene Brown has this ring. I've heard her talk about this, that she turns around on her finger 3 times before she answers a question.
Ooh.
Like, can you join this committee? A couple of us are getting together. It should only be a couple of meetings a year. Turn the ring 3 times before you answer and really check in with like, do I want to? How do I feel about this? You can jump to just pleasing them and sure, I guess I could do that. But turn the ring 3 times before you answer. And just that pause is enough time for something else to happen for yourself. Mm-hmm. And then I guess that is another version of then same thing. When you set a boundary, it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be lengthy. It's okay if they're mad. It's okay if nobody's sure what's going to happen next now in this conversation, this weird Zoom that you're on where everybody's like, did she just say she's quitting? Like it is weird, but don't let the fear of it being weird stop you. And then you let it be weird. And then something else will happen. Somebody else will take over, or maybe the company goes out of business. I don't know what happens next, but like, don't let the, but I can't say that because then I can't imagine what would happen next be the thing that's holding you back. So pause before you say yes, pause after you say no, right? When people say no is a complete sentence, like, well, I know, but then I get this weird silence. That's okay. Keep going. Sit in your hands. Let me think if I have anything else to add to that. And I think it is getting in touch with how you feel about things, because I think the first step when you're somebody like me is to be like, no, I'm fine with it. It's just I feel like I have too much to do. You don't even recognize what your own feelings are about it. And I think you can like watercolor about it for the rest of your life and stay stuck. But if you are that kind of person, like, no, it's fine, it's good. I don't mind. That's always what you're saying. And you're like, but how do I really feel about it? And the answer is sort of like, I don't know. I don't know. Yeah. Then that's worth exploring. But still have the difficult conversation. Don't fix that first. You see what I'm saying? Just like that's as you look back. Now that and also don't say yes to the very next thing. Right.
Easy fixes. Right.
Do that. Yeah. Those are the easy fixes.
It's so interesting because we're talking a lot about what feels like, you know, the day-to-day type of things that we get pulled into because of people pleasing. Maybe it's one task or me, you know, whether it's at home or at work. But I mean, I have to share, you know, I spent years in an executive position because it was what was required of me and my company. And I don't regret it, but I do think there was a large part of my decision to stay that had to do with because other people expected of me. And so we're talking about an entire career. We're talking about years worth of a life spent fulfilling the role that you think you're obligated to, just simply because it was what was supposed to happen next. And I look back at that and think, I'm glad I did it. It taught me a lot. It was what the company needed. But there was definitely a significant pull to make those decisions because of what other people expected. So I do think practicing in these low stakes scenarios is really important because, my God, what if you wind up in a high stakes scenario where you're people pleasing and it's changing your whole life?
That's a really good point. Start micro and start with the low stakes stuff. That's a really good point because, and looking back, it's important to look back because then next time I'll see this sooner. But I mean, the book is also mostly about giving yourself grace. Like I try to put different kinds of situations in the book where sometimes I was like, we are going to see this through and we are not going to give up. And it was the right thing to have done for me, for my kid, for whatever it was I was dealing with. And then sometimes it wasn't. And so people always ask me, but how do you know? How do you know if you're pushing too hard or you need to give up? And I'm like, I'm not so sure about that. It's really hard to know in the moment. But I think getting in touch in little ways with how you feel about things will make it easier when things are tough to be like, am I okay? What are my motivations here?
That resentment litmus test is really important. Yeah.
Yeah. And I just think that people presume that that's there all the time when it really, I don't know, like some of us, no, I was always the one charging uphill, like, come on, everybody. Like there wasn't resentment. It was maybe there might be self-centeredness involved in that, but
Yeah.
it wasn't like, why doesn't anybody see what I do? I'm like, look, everybody, look at what I'm doing. It was kind of the other side of that, maybe. It's not
Right.
perfect, but the fix I was being given, like, stop looking at your, your sick need to please other people. I was always like, that doesn't really resonate with me. And I think that
Yeah.
was why.
I think too, well, actually, let me ask you a question that came up in the Instagram stories, because I thought this was really good. You talk about being in your 50s and you're writing all of this incredible advice for women so that we maybe don't simply repeat the generational patterns that have happened.
Yes.
And so someone actually asked, what is the best thing that you can say to someone in the moment when you recognize that they are people pleasing? And I thought about this as a really cool scenario, right? Like imagine yourself in that mentorship role and you're noticing another woman in her early 20s or maybe mid 30s is just actively people pleasing, and you can see it. Like if you're in the room, what would you say to her?
I'm wary of saying like, you have to fix that person. You have to rescue her from herself. But I'd like to think that being the example to the women who are younger than me and saying like, you don't have to do that. Just because somebody wants you to doesn't mean you have to. Just because you did it last year doesn't mean you have to do it this year. And I see that in the women who've read this book. I see that in the women my age who are like, I'm sending this book to my daughter at college. And then I also see it in the women I've met at book signings and things who are in their 60s and 70s, who always raise their hand during the discussion part and say something to the effect of like, you'll see, this gets so much easier, ladies. You'll see, it won't be a problem. And so I think that's very interesting because I'm like, wait a minute, you can say no sometimes. And then the women who are older than me are like, of course you can. Yes, of course. And the 20 somethings are like, you can say no sometimes. So I wonder, like, it might just be a woman's life.
Yeah.
I'd like to think that reading this book can help you jump the line. But I think all that you have to do if you see somebody younger than you or junior to you trying too hard to do more than she should out of this misplaced need for to be liked, is to just check in with her and say like, you got this. You don't have to take on more than you can handle. And this becomes too much. You can say no. Just walk her through it because it might be the first time she's had it presented to her.
Yeah. That your voice is going to be the one in my head now too when I encounter that.
Right.
That was very loving and warm and kind. And hey, it's okay if you do, but also you don't have to. I think that going back to your topic of grace, it's giving ourselves that grace.
It's giving yourself grace. There's a chapter in the book about skiing, and I learned to ski at the same time than my kids. It's a funny story. And I mean, it went disastrously because they were 3 and 4 and 5 and found it fun and learned in 10 minutes. And it was a disaster, but I had to keep going because my kids couldn't see me quit, because my kids couldn't think it was okay to quit. And I'm just going to keep going and I'm going to keep going. And finally, one night, my husband was like, you don't have to keep doing it if you hate it. And I was like, I don't. And I never skied again and never looked back. And it was, the best decision I ever made. And not because I live in this, trad wife relationship with my husband, but it really took him offhandedly saying to me, you don't have to keep doing it if you hate it. Yeah. For me to it really was, it hadn't occurred to me.
What a light bulb.
Yeah. Until someone said it out loud that I could quit if I wanted to. So I think that's it. If you see it, say it, and without a blame and without a fix these things about yourself. Just like, hey, I know the world wants you to do it all, but you don't.
Yeah, we can give ourselves that permission. Amy, this has been such a lovely conversation, so refreshing over a topic that is often so cringy. And so I appreciate you bringing it up and writing an entire book about it. As we end the podcast, I ask every guest the same question, which is the one we ask around our family dinner table with my 2 littles every night, which is, what made you smile today? Or as my youngest has dubbed it, she says, what was your happy today?
My happy today is, I also come from the future. On What Fresh Hell, we're a parenting podcast. And we always say, we come from the future, it's not all terrible. It's going to be fine. Instead of stop worrying, we kind of say,
the other side of the advice, by the way, is hysterical. That segment that you guys do on the podcast. Where
yeah.
They'll only be young once. Yes. But also then they will throw up in a trash can correctly.
Right. It's good. Better things are also coming. And so I also come from the future. It's okay. You're going to be good. good things are in store even after they're 18. So here's the thing that made me smile today is I have a sophomore in college who communicates with me pretty much exclusively through Instagram videos being sent back and forth of animals doing funny things. And so he sent me a thing this morning of a bulldog like barking very angrily because it was time for his dinner and he wasn't having it. So he was like jumping and barking at the same time. And just he and I have the same funny bone, and you don't even have to talk. We just send these animal videos back and forth, and it always makes me smile.
I love that. I love that that's your main form of communication too, because there's no better form of love than Instagram memes, right?
That's right. He's still alive, and he's sending his mom a dog meme. He must love me.
So sweet. Thank you so much for being on the show. We really, really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of Who Made You the Boss? If you've gained something meaningful from today, my one request is that you share it with a friend. And after you do that, I'm going to invite you to check out a resource that I am passionate about. This is not an ad. It is something I wish I would have had when I was building my own business. As you may already know, most businesses stall when the business owners fail to work on themselves. That's why we're here, right? We all want to grow and be better. That's why I'm excited to tell you about Owner, which is a first of its kind nonprofit for business owners. By focusing on the intersection of personal growth and business progression, Owner educates business owners to thrive both financially and personally. For more information, please visit www.o-nr.org. I really think you're going to benefit from it. See you next time.